The manager's voice cut through the restaurant like a knife through silence. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out. Right now." Every single head in that restaurant turned. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died instantly. And I watched as my mother stood there in the middle of that dining room, surrounded by strangers who were already reaching for their phones. She was 52 years old. She had worked in that restaurant for 8 long years. 8 years of early mornings and late nights. 8 years of smiling through exhaustion. 8 years of serving people who never once bothered to learn her name. And in 3 minutes flat, it was all ripped away from her. The manager stood there with his chest puffed out like he had just won some kind of victory. Customers whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others already recording the whole thing. My mother's hands trembled as she slowly untied her apron. Her eyes glistened with tears she was too proud to let fall. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply folded that apron with the same care she folded everything and placed it on the nearest table. And then she turned to walk out. But here's the thing, nobody in that restaurant knew. The woman they were recording. The woman they were whispering about. The woman that manager had just humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. She was my mother. And I had just pulled up outside in a car worth more than that entire restaurant. Before I go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that the way you treat people matters, if you believe that what goes around truly does come around, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened next in that restaurant is something that nobody saw coming. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you're going to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Riverside Grill sat on the corner of Madison and 5th in one of the busiest parts of downtown. It wasn't the fanciest restaurant in the city, but it had a reputation. White tablecloths, expensive, wine lists, the kind of place where business deals were made over lunch and wealthy couples celebrated anniversaries over dinner. And right in the middle of all that elegance was my mother, Margaret. She had worked there for 8 years. 8 years of carrying heavy trays. 8 years of memorizing complicated orders. 8 years of being on her feet for 10 hours straight while her knees ached and her back screamed for relief. But you would never know it by looking at her. My mother had this way about her, this quiet grace that made people feel seen. She remembered birthdays. She remembered anniversaries. She remembered that Mrs. Patterson at table 7 liked her steak medium rare, but always said medium because she was embarrassed to ask. She remembered that Mr. Holloway's wife had passed away last spring, and she always made sure to ask how he was doing, really doing, not just the polite version. The other servers loved her because she was always the first to cover a shift when someone's kid got sick. She was always the one to help the new hires when they were overwhelmed and close to tears. She never complained, never gossiped, never made anyone feel small. But there was one person in that restaurant who didn't see her the way everyone else did. Mr. Vincent, the general manager. He was the kind of man who wore his authority like a weapon. Everything about him screamed ambition. The slicked back hair, the too tight suits, the way he looked at the staff like they were pieces on a chessboard he was constantly rearranging. To him, my mother was invisible. She was labor. She was a number on a schedule. She was someone he could replace in a heartbeat if she ever stepped out of line. And the thing about men like Mr. Vincent is they're always waiting. Waiting for a reason. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for the perfect moment to remind everyone exactly who holds the power. My mother knew this. She had worked for men like him her whole life, so she kept her head down, did her job, smiled through the disrespect, counted down the hours until she could go home to her small apartment and rest her tired bones. But what Mr. Vincent didn't know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that my mother had a secret she had kept for over a decade, a secret that walked through those restaurant doors that very afternoon. In the back of the kitchen, away from the noise of the lunch rush, my mother kept a small photograph tucked inside her locker. It was worn at the edges, faded from years of being touched, but she looked at it every single day before her shift started. It was a picture of me, taken on my college graduation day, the last day I saw her before everything changed. She never told anyone about that photo, never mentioned she had a son, never spoke about her past or her family, or the life she lived outside those restaurant walls. Because my mother understood something that most people never learn. She knew that the moment people find out you're connected to money or power or influence, they stop seeing you. They start seeing what you can do for them. They start calculating your worth based on who you know instead of who you are. So she stayed silent, stayed invisible, stayed exactly who she had always been. A woman who believed that kindness was its own reward. A woman who had no idea that today, everything was about to change. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything fell apart. The lunch rush was in full swing. Tables were packed. Servers were rushing back and forth like a choreographed dance. The kitchen was loud with the clang of pots and the shouting of orders. My mother was working the section near the front windows. 4 tables, all demanding, all impatient, all completely unaware that the woman serving them had been on her feet since 5 in the morning. She had just delivered a complicated order to table 12 when she noticed him, a man standing just inside the entrance. He wasn't a customer. You could tell that immediately. His clothes were worn and dirty. His hair was matted. His shoes had holes in them. He stood there looking around with this expression that I'll never forget when my mother described it to me later. It was the look of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be welcome anywhere. The hostess was already moving toward him with that tight smile that meant she was about to ask him to leave. Other customers were glancing over with expressions of discomfort. One woman actually covered her nose with her napkin. But my mother saw something different. She saw his hands, how they trembled. She saw his eyes, how they darted around the room like he was expecting to be hurt. She saw the way he swallowed hard when he looked at the plates of food being carried past him. And in that moment, she made a decision that would cost her everything, and give her back even more. She walked right past the hostess, right past the uncomfortable stares, right up to that man who everyone else wanted to disappear. "Sir," she said softly, "are you hungry?" He looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language, like kindness was something he had forgotten existed. "I don't have any money," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'll leave." But my mother shook her head. "I didn't ask about money. I asked if you were hungry." His eyes filled with tears. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," he said. My mother nodded once. Then she did something that broke every rule in that restaurant. She led him to a small table in the corner. She sat him down. She brought him a glass of water first because she knew that when you're that hungry, your body needs hydration before food. And then she went into the kitchen and made him a plate herself. Not scraps, not leftovers. A real meal. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, a warm roll with butter. She brought it to him and set it down gently. "Take your time," she said. "No one's going to rush you." And then she did something that made that man break down completely. She sat across from him, just for a moment, just long enough to look him in the eyes and say something that he later told me he had been waiting years to hear. "You matter. Whatever happened to bring you here, it doesn't define you. You matter." He ate that meal with tears streaming down his face. And when he was done, he looked at my mother and said something that stopped her heart. No one has looked me in the eye in 2 years. I was starting to think I was already dead. My mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're not dead. You're just lost. And lost people can always find their way home." She didn't know it then. But that man would come back into this story in a way that nobody could have predicted. But that moment, that beautiful, human, compassionate moment, that was exactly when Mr. Vincent walked around the corner, and his face twisted into something ugly. Mr. Vincent didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching, calculating. His eyes moved from the homeless man to my mother, to the empty plate, to the customers who were now whispering among themselves. And then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that made your stomach drop. The kind of smile that told you something terrible was about to happen, and the person smiling was going to enjoy every second of it. "Margaret," he said loudly. "My office. Now." My mother stood up slowly. She gave the homeless man one last gentle look and whispered, "Go out the side entrance. There's a shelter 3 blocks east. Tell them Margaret sent you." And then she followed Mr. Vincent, but he didn't take her to his office. He stopped right in the middle of the dining room, right in the center of the lunch crowd, right where everyone could see and hear, and he turned to face her. "Do you know what you just did?" he said, his voice carrying across the room. My mother kept her composure. "I helped someone who was hungry," she said quietly. "You stole from this restaurant," he shot back. "You gave away food without authorization. You let a vagrant sit at one of our tables. You embarrassed this establishment in front of paying customers. The room had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on them. Someone in the corner had their phone out, recording. "Mr. Vincent," my mother said calmly. He was a human being who hadn't eaten in 3 days. I used my employee meal credit. I didn't steal anything. But the manager wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in the show. He stepped closer to her. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Close enough that everyone could see the power dynamic at play. "You think you're special, don't you?" he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You think because you've been here for a few years you can do whatever you want. You think the rules don't apply to you." My mother said nothing. "Well, let me tell you something, Margaret. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. You're a waitress. You carry plates. You take orders. That's all you are. That's all you'll ever be." Still, my mother said nothing. But I know that inside, something was breaking. 8 years, he continued. 8 years, and this is how you repay us. By turning this restaurant into a soup kitchen. By driving away customers who actually pay for their meals. He reached over and grabbed her name tag right off her uniform. Held it up for everyone to see. "Margaret," he read mockingly. "Well, Margaret, you're done here." Then came the words that still make my blood boil every time I think about them. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out. Right now." The gasps that rippled through the restaurant were audible. Some customers looked uncomfortable. Others looked entertained. A few were definitely recording everything. But my mother did something that still makes me proud to this day. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She simply untied her apron, folded it neatly with those same careful hands that had served thousands of meals, and she placed it on the nearest table. Then she picked up her small cloth bag, the same bag she had carried every day for 8 years, the bag that held her photograph of me, her reading glasses, her house keys, everything she owned in that place, and she turned to walk out. I want you to pause right here with me. I want you to think about someone in your life who has been treated unfairly, someone who was humiliated when they deserved respect, someone who was torn down when they should have been lifted up. Drop a comment right now and tell me about them. Type the word justice if you believe that karma is real, if you believe that what goes around comes around, because what's about to happen next is going to prove it in ways you cannot imagine. Now, back to the story. My mother pushed through the front door of that restaurant and stepped out into the harsh afternoon sunlight. Her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. 8 years. Gone. She had given that place 8 years of her life. 8 years of missed holidays. 8 years of aching joints and forced smiles. 8 years of making other people feel important while she remained invisible. And for what? For feeding a hungry man. She stood there on the sidewalk, clutching her bag to her chest, trying to remember how to breathe, trying to figure out what she was supposed to do now, trying to hold together the pieces of a life that had just shattered in front of a room full of strangers. And that's when she heard it. The screech of tires. She looked up. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom had just pulled up to the curb directly in front of the restaurant. It was the kind of car that made people stop and stare. The kind of car that cost more than most houses. The kind of car that belonged to someone powerful. The driver's door opened first. A man in a formal suit stepped out and hurried around to the back passenger door. He opened it with practiced precision, and I stepped out. I didn't see her immediately. My eyes were scanning the restaurant entrance, looking for any sign of her. The address she had mentioned once, years ago. The place where she said she worked. I had been trying to find her for months. Private investigators, database searches, everything money could buy. But my mother had gotten very good at staying invisible. Until today. Today, everything aligned. A news story about this restaurant had shown up in my feed that morning. Something about their anniversary celebration. And in the background of one of the photos, barely visible, was a woman carrying a tray. A woman with familiar eyes. My mother. I had canceled every meeting. Rerouted my private jet. Driven here from the airport at speeds I'm not proud of. And now, I was here. I turned my head toward the sidewalk. And there she was, standing alone, looking broken, clutching that same old cloth bag I remembered from my childhood. Time stopped. The noise of the city faded away. The crowd that had gathered to look at the car disappeared. Everything disappeared except her. My mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for me. I walked toward her, past the valet who was trying to take my keys, past the onlookers who were already whispering about who I might be, past the restaurant windows where I could see faces pressed against the glass. She looked up as I approached. Confusion clouded her face at first. She didn't recognize me, didn't recognize the suit or the car or the man I had become. But I recognized her. I would recognize her anywhere, in any crowd, in any city, in any lifetime. I stopped directly in front of her, and I said the only word that mattered, Mom. The word hung in the air between us. Mom. Her eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her bag slipped from her fingers and fell to the sidewalk. Marcus, she whispered. Marcus, is that you? It's me, Mom. I'm here. She reached out with trembling hands and touched my face, like she was making sure I was real, like she was afraid I might disappear if she looked away. Oh my God, she breathed. Oh my God, oh my God. And then she was in my arms. 12 years of distance collapsed in that single embrace. 12 years of phone calls that were never long enough. 12 years of holidays spent alone. 12 years of missing her so much it felt like a physical wound. I held her tight, tighter than I had ever held anything in my life, and I felt her body shaking with sobs she could no longer control. You're here, she kept saying. You're really here. I'm here, Mom. I'm not going anywhere. I don't know how long we stood there. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 30 minutes. Time didn't exist in that moment. Nothing existed except the two of us. But slowly, I became aware of our surroundings again. The crowd that had gathered. The phones that were recording. The faces in the restaurant windows. And then I noticed something else. My mother's apron was gone. Her name tag was missing. Her eyes were red and swollen. She had been crying before I got here. I pulled back and held her face in my hands. Mom, I said carefully, what happened? Why are you crying? She tried to shake her head, tried to minimize, tried to do what she always did. It's nothing, baby. I'm just so happy to see you. It's nothing. But a voice from the crowd interrupted. She just got fired, someone said loudly. The manager fired her right in front of everyone. It was awful. I turned toward the voice. An older woman was standing near the entrance, her expression filled with sympathy. Fired, I repeated slowly. The woman nodded. She fed a homeless man. That's all she did. She gave him a meal, and that manager came out and screamed at her in front of the whole restaurant. Another voice chimed in. He called her nothing, said she was worthless, made her take off her apron in front of everyone. My mother tugged at my sleeve. Marcus, please, let's just go. It doesn't matter anymore. But it did matter. It mattered more than she could possibly know, because I knew something that nobody else on that sidewalk knew, something that was about to change everything. I looked toward the restaurant entrance, and I saw him, the manager. Mr. Vincent. He was standing just inside the glass doors, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and concern. He had seen the car, seen the crowd, seen me embrace the woman he had just fired. And now he was trying to figure out what was happening. Our eyes met, and I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. I kissed my mother's forehead and whispered, wait here for just a moment. Then I turned and walked toward the restaurant. The crowd parted for me instinctively. There's something about the way successful people move that makes others step aside. I didn't ask for a path. I didn't need to. It simply appeared. The glass doors of Riverside Grill opened as I approached. Mr. Vincent was waiting just inside. He had straightened his tie, adjusted his jacket, put on his most professional smile. He extended his hand. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Riverside Grill. I'm the general manager here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. I must say, that's quite an impressive vehicle you... I didn't take his hand. Instead, I looked around the restaurant, at the customers who had witnessed my mother's humiliation, at the staff who had watched and said nothing, at the elegant decor and white tablecloths and expensive wine bottles. Then I looked back at Mr. Vincent. His hand was still extended. His smile was faltering. What's your name? I asked quietly. Vincent, he said, finally lowering his hand. Richard Vincent. I'm the general manager. If there's anything I can do to make your dining experience... I'm not here to dine. He blinked. I'm here because of the woman you just fired." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, fear. "The waitress," he stammered. "Margaret. Yes, unfortunately there was an incident. She violated company policy. I had no choice but to—" "What exactly did she do?" He straightened his shoulders, trying to regain his composure. "She gave food to a vagrant without authorization. She let a homeless man sit at one of our tables. She embarrassed this establishment in front of paying customers. Surely you can understand that we have standards to maintain." I let his words hang in the air for a moment. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly." He nodded eagerly. "You fired a woman who had worked here for 8 years. Well, yes, but you humiliated her in front of a room full of people. I wouldn't say humiliate exactly. You called her nothing. You said she was worthless. You ripped her name tag off and made her remove her apron in front of paying customers." He was sweating now, small beads forming at his temples. "Sir, I don't know what your relationship is to this woman, but I assure you, she's my mother." The words dropped like stones into still water. The entire restaurant went silent, even more silent than before, if that was possible. Mr. Vincent's face drained of color. Your mother." "My mother," I repeated. "The woman you just called nothing. The woman you just fired for feeding someone who was hungry. That woman is my mother." He took a step backward. "First, I didn't know. I had no idea. If I had known, that's the problem." He stopped. "You didn't need to know who her son was to treat her with basic human dignity. You didn't need to know she was connected to anyone powerful or wealthy or important. She was a human being. She was your employee. She deserved respect regardless of who she knew. Sir, I can fix this. I can—" "No, you can't. But before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you somewhere else first. I need to take you back to a time before the suits and the cars and the magazine covers, back to a time when I was just a skinny kid from the wrong side of town, back to a time when my mother was my entire world. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building that probably should have been condemned. The elevator never worked. The heat was unreliable. The walls were thin enough that you could hear the neighbors fighting at 2 in the morning. But my mother made it a home. She worked 3 jobs back then. Cleaning offices in the early morning before I woke up, waitressing at a diner during the day while I was at school, and doing laundry at a hotel at night while I did my homework alone. I used to wonder when she slept. I later learned the answer was almost never. Every night, no matter how exhausted she was, she would sit with me while I did my homework. She didn't understand most of it. She had dropped out of school at 16 to help support her own family. But she sat there anyway, asked me questions, made me explain things to her. Because that's how she made sure I was learning. "Books will take you where my hands can't reach," she used to say. "You're going to have a different life than me, Marcus. A better life. I'm going to make sure of it." She never bought herself anything new. Her clothes were from thrift stores. Her shoes were held together with duct tape and prayer. But somehow, I always had what I needed for school. Somehow, there was always enough for my textbooks, my field trips, my applications. I didn't know until years later that she often didn't eat so that I could. I remember one night when I was 13. I had woken up thirsty and gone to the kitchen for water. It was after midnight. And there was my mother, sitting at the tiny kitchen table, counting coins by the light of a single candle. She didn't hear me approach. I watched as she counted the same pile of coins 3 times. Watched as she put her head in her hands. Watched as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. That was the night I made myself a promise that I would work harder than anyone else, study longer than anyone else, push further than anyone else. A promise that one day I would make sure she never had to count coins again. When I was 17, I got accepted to college, full scholarship, the first person in my family to ever go. But there was a problem. The scholarship covered tuition, but not application fees, not travel expenses, not the deposit required to secure my spot. $700. That's what stood between me and everything I had ever dreamed of. My mother didn't have $700. We didn't have $700. We barely had enough to cover rent that month. I told her I would defer for a year. Work, save up, apply again later. She didn't say anything, but the next morning, She handed me an envelope with exactly $700 in cash. I asked her where she got it. She didn't answer. It wasn't until months later that I found out. She had sold her wedding ring, the only thing she had left from my father, who had died when I was 3. A simple gold band that she had worn every single day for 20 years. She had sold it so that I could go to college. When I confronted her about it, you know what she said? She said, "That ring was a symbol of love, and there's no greater love than a mother's love for her child. Your father would understand." He would have done the same thing. I cried that night harder than I had ever cried in my life, and I made myself another promise. A promise that I would make that sacrifice worth it. A promise that I would become someone who could protect her. A promise that I would never, ever let anyone make her feel small again. I pulled out my phone. Mr. Vincent watched nervously as I dialed a number. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking now, "whatever misunderstanding has occurred, I'm sure we can resolve it. If you'd like, I can personally apologize to your mother. I can offer her a severance package. I held up one finger to silence him. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "James," I said, "I need you to pull up the file on the Castellan group." The customers in the restaurant were all watching now. Staff had gathered near the kitchen entrance. Everyone knew something significant was happening. "Yes," I continued into the phone. "Specifically, their restaurant holdings in the downtown area. What's the status on that?" I listened for a moment. "Good. I need you to fast-track something for me." Mr. Vincent was visibly sweating now. "Which property?" I repeated for the benefit of everyone listening. "Riverside Grill, the one on Madison and 5th. "Yes, that one." I watched the color drain from the manager's face. "Push the announcement forward to today. Effective immediately." I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the ice settling in water glasses. Mr. Vincent's voice came out as barely a whisper. What was that about?" I smiled slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Vincent, do you know who owns this restaurant?" He straightened, grasping for anything familiar. "The Castellan Group," he said. "They're a hospitality conglomerate based in Chicago. I report to their regional director." I nodded slowly. "The Castellan Group, yes. I acquired them 6 months ago." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Acquired them. They're a subsidiary of my company now. Have been for half a year. We've been doing quiet evaluations of all their properties, deciding which ones to keep, which ones to renovate, which ones to close." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands and looked at the screen. "Go ahead," I said. "Answer it." He pressed the phone to his ear. I watched his face as he listened, watched it crumble, watched every ounce of arrogance drain away and leave nothing but fear. "Yes," he whispered. "I understand. Yes, I understand." He lowered the phone slowly. A customer in the back called out, "What happened? What did they say?" Mr. Vincent's voice was hollow. "The restaurant was just sold. New ownership effective immediately." I looked around the room at all the faces staring at me. "That's correct," I said. "I bought it." Then I turned back to face the man who had humiliated my mother. "Actually," I said, "I bought it 3 months ago. I just hadn't decided what to do with it yet. But you helped me figure that out today. So thank you for that." The gasps that filled the room were audible. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Mr. Vincent," I said calmly, "let's talk about leadership for a moment." He was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. "A good leader," I continued, "understands that their job is to lift people up, to create an environment where employees feel valued and respected, to recognize that the people who work for you are human beings with lives and families and struggles you know nothing about." My voice carried across the silent restaurant. "A good leader does not humiliate their staff in public, does not tear people down to make themselves feel powerful, does not mistake cruelty for authority." I stepped closer to him. "My mother worked for you for 8 years. 8 years of early mornings and late nights. 8 years of putting up with difficult customers and impossible demands. And in 8 years, you never once saw her as anything more than labor." His lip was trembling. Today, she fed a man who was starving. She showed compassion to someone who had been treated as invisible by everyone else. And your response was to fire her, to humiliate her, to call her nothing in front of a room full of strangers I shook my head. That tells me everything I need to know about your leadership. Sir, he croaked, please. I've worked here for 12 years. I have a family. I have a mortgage. If you would just... You have a family? Yes. And a mortgage? Yes. I nodded slowly. And yet when you fired my mother today, you didn't care that she might have a family. Didn't care that she might have bills to pay. Didn't care about anything except making yourself feel powerful. He had no response to that. I turned to face the room. I want everyone here to understand something, I said. This man is being let go today. But not because he fired my mother. Not because she happens to be connected to someone with money and influence. I paused to make sure everyone was listening. He's being let go because he lacks the basic human decency required to lead other human beings. Because he believes that power means the ability to tear people down. Because he represents everything that is wrong with how we treat the people who serve us. I turned back to Mr. Vincent. You're fired, I said. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. And then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a business card. I handed it to him. He looked at it in confusion. What is this? He asked. It's the number for a leadership development program I fund. 6 months of training. Focuses on emotional intelligence, ethical management, servant leadership. He stared at me. I'm not offering you your job back, I clarified, but I am offering you a chance to become a better person. What you do with that chance is up to you. Then I turned away from him and walked toward my mother. My mother was standing just inside the entrance now. Someone had given her a chair. Someone else had brought her water. The staff who had witnessed her humiliation were now gathered around her protectively. Amazing how quickly things change when the power dynamics shift. I knelt down in front of her and took her hands. Mom, I said softly, I need to tell you something. She was looking at me with those same eyes I remembered from childhood. The eyes that had watched over me every night. The eyes that had cried when she thought I was sleeping. This restaurant, I said, it's yours now. She shook her head immediately. Marcus, no, that's too much. I can't. You can, I interrupted gently. You spent 8 years serving this place. Now it's going to serve you. But I don't know how to run a restaurant, she protested. Then you'll learn, and you'll have the best people helping you every step of the way. But this place, Mom, this place is yours. To run however you want. To create whatever kind of environment you believe in. Tears were streaming down her face now. The customers who had recorded her humiliation were now recording something very different. The staff who had watched in silence were now openly crying. And that's when I heard a voice from the back of the room. Excuse me. I turned. Everyone turned. Standing near the rear entrance was the homeless man my mother had fed earlier. He had come back, but he wasn't asking for food this time. He was walking toward us with something in his hand. Security moved to stop him, but I waved them off. Let him through, I said. He approached slowly, his eyes never leaving my mother's face. When he reached us, he stopped, and he held out his hand. In it was a crumpled, faded business card. My business card. I stared at it. Where did you get this? I asked. He smiled sadly. I wasn't always like this, he said. His voice was rough, but clear. His eyes were intelligent beneath the exhaustion. 3 years ago, I was an engineer at a tech company, senior systems architect, 20 years of experience. I had a home, a car, a life. The room was completely silent. Then my wife got sick. Cancer. The treatments weren't covered by insurance. I spent everything trying to save her. Took out loans, maxed every credit card, and in the end, I lost her anyway. His voice cracked. I couldn't recover. Lost my job because I couldn't focus. Lost my house because I couldn't pay. Lost everything. He looked down at the business card in his hand. A year ago, someone gave me this card. Said if I ever needed help, this company was known for giving people second chances. I've been carrying it ever since. But I was too ashamed to ever call. Too broken to believe anyone would want someone like me. He looked at my mother. And then today, your mother looked at me. Not through me. At me. She talked to me like I was human. She fed me like I mattered. Tears were falling from his eyes now. No one has treated me like a person in so long. I forgot what it felt like. I looked at my mother. At this woman who had spent her whole life giving to others. who had sacrificed everything for me, who had been fired for showing kindness to a stranger. And I understood something profound. Her kindness wasn't just a single act. It was a ripple that kept expanding outward, touching lives she would never know, changing futures she couldn't imagine. I stood up and approached the man. "What's your name?" I asked. He straightened slightly. "Robert," he said. "Robert Callahan." "Robert," I said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly." He nodded. "If I gave you a chance, a real chance, to rebuild your life, would you take it?" His whole body started shaking. "Yes," he whispered. "God, yes." I pulled out my phone. "James," I said when my assistant answered, "I need you to set up an interview for tomorrow morning. Engineering department, systems architecture." I ended the call and looked at Robert. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office downtown. We're going to see what you remember and what you've still got. No promises beyond the interview, but it's a start." Robert collapsed, literally collapsed to his knees right there in the middle of the restaurant, and my mother rushed to his side, just like she had done earlier that day. Except now, she wasn't a fired waitress. She was the owner, and her kindness had just created another ripple that would change another life. If this story is making you feel something, I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you're feeling. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that kindness is never wasted. Because this community, our community, is built on the belief that how we treat people matters. And the more we share these stories, the more we remind the world of that truth. Now let me tell you how this story ends. 3 months later, Riverside Grill had a new name, Margaret's Table. My mother had insisted on keeping it simple. No fancy rebranding, no expensive redesign, just her name on the door and a new philosophy in the kitchen. I visited every Sunday. It was the only appointment I never canceled. Board meetings could wait. International deals could be rescheduled, but Sunday dinner with my mother was sacred. The restaurant looked different now, not structurally. The bones were still the same. The elegant decor remained. The white tablecloths still covered the tables, but the feeling was different. The staff smiled more, not the forced smiles of people afraid of losing their jobs. Real smiles, the kind that come from being treated with dignity. My mother had implemented new policies from day one. Every employee got a living wage, healthcare benefits, paid time off that they were actually encouraged to use, and a simple rule that hung in the break room. Here, everyone matters, no exceptions. But the biggest change was the corner booth. My mother had designated it as a special table. It was always set, always ready, and anyone who came in hungry, truly hungry, could sit there and eat for free. No questions asked, no judgment given, just a hot meal and a moment of being seen. The community had embraced it. Local businesses donated. Regular customers contributed to a fund that covered the meals. What started as one table became a movement. And Robert Callahan, he sat at that corner booth sometimes too. Not because he needed food anymore. He was 6 months into his job at my company now, recently promoted, already being considered for a management position. He sat there because he wanted to remember. Remember what it felt like to be seen for the first time in years. Remember the woman who had looked him in the eye and told him he mattered. Remember that his whole life changed because one person chose kindness over protocol. He was also dating the hostess from the restaurant, but that's another story. I stood at the window of my corner office on the 47th floor and looked out at the city below. Somewhere down there, in a restaurant that used to be called Riverside Grill, my mother was probably fussing over a new employee, probably making sure the corner booth was properly set, probably remembering a customer's name that they had only mentioned once. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the tiny apartment with the broken elevator, the nights she counted coins by candlelight, the wedding ring she sold so I could go to college, the 12 years we spent apart while I built something from nothing. And I thought about what she had taught me, not through lectures or lessons, but through the way she lived her life. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or real estate or stock portfolios. True wealth is measured in how you make people feel. She taught me that power isn't the ability to tear others down. Power is the ability to lift others up. She taught me that kindness isn't weakness. Kindness is the strongest force in the world. And she taught me that no matter how far you climb, no matter how much you achieve, no matter how many zeros are in your net worth, you should never ever forget where you came from, or who got you there. I turned away from the window. On my desk was a framed photograph, an old photo, worn at the edges, faded from years of being touched. It was the photograph my mother had kept in her locker for all those years. The one from my college graduation, the last day she saw me before everything changed. She had given it to me last Sunday. "Keep this," she had said, "so you never forget the boy you used to be. He's still in there, Marcus. Don't ever let the world take him away." I picked up the photograph and looked at my younger self. Skinny, nervous, standing in an ill-fitting suit that my mother had bought at a thrift store. I was smiling in the picture. She was standing next to me, also smiling, and on her finger, visible if you looked closely, was the wedding ring she would sell 3 weeks later to pay my deposit. I hadn't known it then. Hadn't known that the happiest day of my life was about to become the beginning of her greatest sacrifice. But I knew it now, and I would never forget it. Let me talk directly to you for a moment. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're going through, maybe you feel invisible today. Maybe you feel like nobody sees you, like nobody appreciates what you do, like you're just going through the motions, working a job that doesn't respect you, living a life that doesn't reflect your worth. I want you to know something. Your kindness is being recorded, not on phones, not on cameras, but in the hearts of everyone you touch. Every time you choose compassion over convenience, every time you see the humanity in someone else, every time you sacrifice something of yourself to lift another person up, those moments matter. They ripple outward in ways you cannot imagine. That homeless man my mother fed, she had no idea he was carrying my business card, no idea that her kindness would lead to him getting his life back. She just saw a hungry person and chose to help. That's it. That's all any of us can do. Choose kindness when it's easier to look away. Choose compassion when it's easier to judge. Choose to see people when it's easier to see through them. Because you never know. The person you help today might become someone who changes the world tomorrow. Or the person you dismiss today might have been the one who needed you most. My mother spent her whole life serving others, cleaning their tables, carrying their plates, being invisible to a world that measured value in titles and salaries and social status. But in the end, it was her kindness that mattered most, not my money, not my power, not my ability to buy restaurants and fire managers. Her kindness, that's what changed everything. Remember when I started this story, I told you that a billionaire walked into a restaurant and called a fired waitress mom. I told you that it looked like revenge, but I was wrong. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. My mother spent her whole life being small so that I could become big. And on that day in that restaurant, I finally had the chance to return the favor, not with money. Money is just paper, just numbers on a screen. I returned it with recognition. Recognition that her sacrifices mattered. Recognition that her kindness had power. Recognition that she was never nothing. She was everything. She still is. And if you have someone like that in your life, a mother who sacrificed, a father who worked himself to exhaustion, a grandparent who went without so you could have more, a teacher who saw something in you that no one else did, tell them. Today. Don't wait until you have money or success or the perfect moment. The perfect moment is now. Pick up the phone, write the letter, send the text, tell them what they mean to you, because time is not promised to any of us, and the words we leave unsaid become the regrets we carry forever. Now before I go, I need to ask you something. What did this story make you feel? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who feels invisible, someone who needs to be reminded that their kindness matters, share this video with them. Let's build a community of people who believe that how we treat others is the truest measure of who we are. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And I'll see you next time with another story that might just change the way you see the world. Until then, remember, kindness always comes back. It might take years. It might take decades. It might come in ways you never expected, but it always comes back.